Oh my Lord. Welcome back. I have missed you all so very much. Hello, everyone. It is January 16th, 2019. 2019. And we have been gone far too long. This is the A-Side Live Chat Podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shaun Al-Shatti, and damn, does it feel good to be back. I hope all of you out there in podcast land have had an amazing start to your 2019s. And hey, we are back just in the nick of time. Things are right about to pick up on the MMA calendar, starting this week with the UFC's big debut on ESPN Plus in Brooklyn. And I can think of no better way to ring in the new year than by rekindling things with my better half out here. You know him, my good friend. He is back from a year-long vacation in Japan. Mr. Marc Raimondi. What's good, Marc? How much did you miss us?
It wasn't that long of a vacation, Shaun. Jeez.
It felt that long,
Come on, man.
Marc. It felt that long.
Getting jealous seeing all of my posts on social media from Japan, lamenting your own poor, broke life, broke boy.
Coming out firing shots. I like it.
It's good to be back, though. In all seriousness, I'm pretty psyched about 2019. Pretty psyched about being back here with you. You look incredibly clear, always incredibly handsome, but incredibly clear today, crystal clear. If I'm not mistaken, hopefully that comes across on the live stream. But you look really good. We have some upgrades in our equipment. There's more coming, hopefully by next week. So we're kind of taking this to the next level, the next step for the A side with some better gear, some better stuff. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Hopefully a little bit. We have a few upgrades on my side. Hopefully it shows. If it doesn't, let us know. Your sides should be coming next week. And hey, man, it's a work in progress, but we are kicking things off right in 2019. We got a big event this week, and we have wasted already way too much time this month by not being on air. We have a billion things to talk about, so let's just not waste any more time, man. As we always say, this is your guys' show, so we will talk about whatever you want us to talk about, and you can ask us a question in the MMA fighting page below. Any question that gets 3 recs, those will get turned green and get priority. Or you can ask us a question on Twitter using the hashtags TheASide and Chat Rappers. Replay of this show is going to come up immediately on YouTube. Also, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever else you get your pods. And with that, my friend, are you sure you still remember how to do this?
Do what?
Yeah, that's right. All right, let's get things going from the MMA fighting page. First question of the year coming from our good friend Lucian. Who wants to know about this week in TJ Dillashaw? He writes, TJ Dillashaw's weight cut. Greetings, most fair, and I hope the start of the year has been simply splendid for the two of you. What a warm welcome. Yeah, what a warm welcome for 2019.
I feel all warm and fuzzy inside after that question.
The pictures of TJ Dillashaw during his weight cut this week, hit this week, and he does look pretty horrid in them, says Lucian. Does his seemingly drastic weight cut change your feelings at all on how this match will go? And ultimately, who is your pick to be the winner at this point? So, Marc, let's start with you, man, because you literally just sat down with TJ Dillashaw for an hour here on Monday. I will admit, I am worried about his weight cut. Just seeing it from social media, he does not look the same. What was your thoughts from just sitting down with him, seeing him up close for an hour?
Yeah, so I've been in the boat for a long time, and I've said this here on the show. I've said this on Twitter, that I was never a fan of TJ Dillashaw going down to 125 pounds. I thought that if they were going to do that fight between him and Cejudo, or even him against Demetrius Johnson when that was being talked about, I always wanted that. I always preferred that being at 135, just so Dillashaw could avoid that hellacious weight cut down to 125. Now, Dillashaw is not, I wouldn't say he's an enormous bantamweight, but he's not a small bantamweight either. And he has to lose a decent amount of weight. He probably walks around in the 160s, I would say, maybe the low 160s on the regular when he's cutting to bantamweight. And that's a pretty steep drop for a guy going down to 125. But I did get to see him up close at the media lunch on Monday here in Los Angeles. And hearing him talk and seeing him in person, I'm not as concerned, I guess, as I was previously. I think that Dillashaw is a different kind of guy. I think that he can make the weight. I think that it's not going to be easy, certainly, because this is just the sheer numbers. It's a numbers game. Losing that amount of weight is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that he's working with Sam Calavita. That's the strength and conditioning coach who also works with Aaron Pico and Juan Archuleta and a lot of the guys down in Southern California in Orange County. And this is a guy that a lot of people swear by, and he's legitimately a mathematician. He's actually he's like a math teacher, I believe. So he's very up on science and math and algorithms, and he is using that to get Dillashaw down in weight. And I think combined with that and Dillashaw is just, I mean, he's a different kind of guy when it comes to discipline. He's not going to steer the wrong way. He's going to stick to the plan. He's going to execute the plan perfectly. He's just that kind of guy. He's obsessive. Ask anyone who's trained with him. He's ultra competitive, ultra fiery, and he's ultra disciplined. And I think that he'll stick to the plan. I think that the plan is in place. Again, it's not ideal, but I am less concerned now on Wednesday than I was a week ago or when the fight first got announced for 125, which was surprising in itself. So I think he'll make the weight. I think he'll be okay. Again, not ideal, but I'm more comfortable with it now seeing him in person a few days ago.
So I will say off the top that from the beginning I have been concerned. I have been worried that this is a little too much as it has progressed, and especially now after Monday hearing him and hearing from him. I am less concerned that he'll miss the weight. That being said, I am still very concerned at even if he makes this weight, what is that going to do to him, man? 10 pounds is a lot, especially when you're that low. At this point, when he spoke on Monday, I can't speak already. When he spoke on Monday, he indicated that he was at 135. Who knows if he was telling the truth? But man, he did not look like he had 10 pounds left on him. I'm not going to lie. I'm sure he'll make it. It seems as though they are taking a very professional and very almost scientific approach to the way they're handling this. His nutritionist released like a big mathematics spreadsheet basically from Brett Okamoto on ESPN of just the process that they're using and the way they're breaking this down. And none of it made any sense to me. It all went over my head, and I'm sure the same for you. But so they're doing this very professionally. But man, TJ Dillashaw was 150 pounds when he fought Cody Garbrandt at UFC 227. That's a big difference, man. That is a big difference. And even if he is able to get down to 125, I worry how that's going to affect his cardio, how that's going to affect just his speed, his ability to compete at a world-class level, and most of all, his chin, man. Because that is one thing we have seen repeatedly over the course of the last several years and just over the course of MMA history is if you kill yourself too hard on the weight cut, you dramatically hurt your ability to just take a shot because there's no water left in your brain, in your head to really be able to deal with the kind of blows that is necessary at the top level in this game. I feel as though we're going to get a diminished version of TJ Dillashaw on Saturday, and that's unfortunate because this is a great fight, and I would have loved to see this fight at 135 when we could see both these guys at their best. Meanwhile, Henry Cejudo does not look like he is struggling. He looks better than I have ever seen him look, and I remember a year ago, actually, it was right around this time when the UFC went to Phoenix for Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier. Henry Cejudo's coach, Captain Eric, he had set up a little, I don't know how to describe it, but a little like stand outside of the arena here in Phoenix. And it was right when they were starting to debut their Neural Force One, which is sort of the scientific approach Henry Cejudo is using now. And I spoke with him for maybe 45 minutes before that UFC on Fox event outside the arena. And he was just showing me around the Neural Force One technology that they were using and stuff. And it seemed very interesting at the time. It seemed actually like it was pretty legitimate. And the transformation we've seen from Henry Cejudo over the past year since he's really adapted a lot of these strategies has been quite amazing. I mean, we've all seen the picture of Henry Cejudo just like a week ago. He looked in incredible shape. And it really feels as though he's gotten this weight cut down to 125 already. This is the first time TJ Dillashaw is going to be making this weight since he was in high school. That is a difficult place to put yourself in to go into a world-class type of fight. If you've never done it once as an adult, oh man, it's rough. I think understand exactly what TJ Dillashaw was trying to do. I think we all do. He wants to be the double champ. He wants to get that on his resume. He doesn't get that if the fight's at 135. But I think he bit off too much more than he expected, more than he could chew. By really pushing for this fight at 125. I don't feel like we're going to get the best TJ Dillashaw.
One more thing about this, Shaun, and I guess we'll close it out here. Something to note that could be very important is this fight is taking place in Brooklyn under the jurisdiction of the New York State Athletic Commission. And keep in mind, they are very sensitive to health concerns. They pulled the plug on Max Holloway's weight cut last April at UFC 223 when him and his nutritionist and others around him said that he was fine and he was on pace to make the weight. Now, I don't know what kind of role they will play this week, but it's worth remembering that the NYSAC is sensitive to this stuff. This is a commission and a state that got sued, don't forget, a few years ago and had to pay out a multi-million-dollar settlement because of a brain injury to a boxer. So they are still very sensitive to these health issues. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays in if it does at all this week.
Also, I must add, I mean, history is not on TJ Dillashaw's side in a lot of different ways. If you look at every champ that we've gotten over the past couple of years, as this has sort of become a trend, all of them have come up in weight. They're not coming down. Amanda Nunes, Conor McGregor, Daniel Cormier, all of them went up in weight. Going down is just historically, like, can you think of a good, maybe you're better than me. Can you think of a good instance in which a fighter who has fought for a long time at a certain weight class went down in weight and actually was better?
I mean, I'm sure it's happened. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Not at the elite level. Like you said, we've seen more cases lately of fighters moving up and fighting at an elite level in a championship fight and doing very, very well. In some cases, better than they did at the previous weight class. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that went down in weight at the highest level and succeeded there consistently. I'm sure it's happened. But I can't think of anything.
I'm sure it's happened, but I just feel like you have so many examples recently, especially big time examples. Guys like Anthony Pettis, who 155 forever, and then he moves down to 145. He ends up getting hospitalized, and then he says he balloons up to 205 afterwards because your body just freaks out. Like your body doesn't understand how to handle the situation.
And now he's at 170.
Yeah, and now he's at 170. I hope TJ Dillashaw doesn't end up screwing up his 2019 by wanting to do this. So I will hope for the best. I hope we get the best TJ Dillashaw and the best Henry Cejudo on Saturday. In which way you lean into that matchup?
Oh man, putting me on the spot this early in the show. You know what?
I know the commenter did. Lucian did.
Damn it, Lucian. I thought we were all warm and fuzzy. So I think all of those things being equal, I still favor TJ Dillashaw. I still think that he is the more well-rounded fighter. I think he has more ways to win than Cejudo does, especially on the feet. I think his striking is at a different level. So if Dillashaw walks in there and he's healthy and he's 100%, even if he's 85% of what we know of him as the best bantamweight in the world and as one of the pound-for-pound best, I think I still lean his way in this fight.
See, I'm going to have to go with Henry, just at least right now. Obviously, it's early. We can make actual picks later in the week, but I'm leaning Henry right now just simply because of how difficult it is to make that weight. But we shall see. Hopefully, hope for the best, man. It's a really great matchup, and I would like to see it.
Yeah, let's just make sure it happens.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's keep moving on. Next up from the MMA Fighting page, our good friend Abdel Riff, who wants to know about the long haul for this year. Next year, he writes, who will be the UFC champions? I'd love to hear both your picks. And then he sort of lays out his picks. And maybe we can revisit them next year, he says. So Mark, this is an interesting exercise for us to really do right before the first major event of 2019.
I like it.
Do you want to go? Let's do division by division first. All right.
For sure. Want me to go first?
Yeah. Let's start at the big boys. Heavyweight.
Starting with the big boys.
It's going to be an interesting year at heavyweight. There's a lot of change coming. Daniel Cormier is probably going to retire. Who's going to be champion this time next year?
This is the weight class that you can say with 100% certainty that the champion right now will not be the champion in 2020. You can say that with all certainty because Daniel Cormier is set to retire this year. Although I don't know if that March date is as hard as he once laid it out to be. I think he probably fights multiple times this year, but
I mean, it better not be because he's not booked for March. He is not booked before March.
He's not, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen either. I mean, there's only 2 pay-per-views until after that deadline, and the closest one to that already has their title fights lined up: Jon Jones versus Anthony Smith, and of course Woodley versus Kamaru Usman. And Cormier is not on that card, so I don't know what that means for Cormier. Does he fight in April? Either way, I don't think he's making that deadline. Maybe he doesn't fight until July. Maybe International Fight Week against Brock. Who knows? Anyway, my pick for the UFC heavyweight champion at the end of 2019 is none other than Cain Velasquez.
Oh, you took it from me. You took it from me. I agree with you.
Sorry.
I agree with you. I think Cain's going to beat Francis next month, and I think he ends up fighting Stipe for the vacant title, and we see sort of a renewed chapter from Cain Velasquez. Having talked to him and his team a couple of weeks ago, I have faith that they feel very good about this year.
I mean, I think I'm pretty pumped up for that fight in Phoenix that you're gonna get to see firsthand in a few weeks. And I'm bullish on Cain Velasquez's return. I think that despite all the injuries, maybe these few years off have been good for him in a way. He's got a lot of wear and tear on his body. Maybe they did well to kind of get him back. But yeah, that's my pick right now.
People talk about the injuries, but man, he's been healthy for about a year and a half. He has just been playing dad. Like, he has been perfect for like a year and a half at this point. So it seems like they may have figured something out. So light heavyweight now. I feel like we probably have the same pick on this one too, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Jon Jones is probably going to be the champion unless he gets in his own way this time next year.
Jon Jones will be the UFC light heavyweight champion at the end of 2019. I have very little doubt about that. I think that this is going to be a really big year for him. I think that it's going to further cement him as the best of all time. First up is Anthony Smith. I think he'll try to fight at least.
You just love calling him the GOAT. It's
well, I love being honest and being true. That's my whole thing, Shaun. I'm a truth teller. I'm a truth teller. And when I say Jon Jones is the best of all time, yes, that is the truth.
2 failed drug tests, my friend.
Whatever. Middleweight, UFC middleweight champion at the end of 2019. Who you got?
So this one was the hardest one for me. I'm not gonna lie, and it's likely, like, so if you just project forward, right? Because it's likely that Robert Whittaker, for him to keep his title, he's gonna have to face 2 or 3 of these guys. He's gonna fight Kelvin Gastelum, obviously, very soon, and then he'll most likely fight Israel Adesanya, who will probably beat Anderson Silva. And then I'm going to go ahead and guess that Paulo Costa will be next because he is very close and he's probably 1 fight away, and it feels as though they are very high on him. And if you look at those 3, that is as tough of a slate as any champion has in front of him, man. That is an incredibly hard slate. And Robert Whittaker may already be one of the most talented middleweights I've ever seen, just in terms of pure talent. And he's only fought at middleweight 8 times, which is relatively incredible, but his resume already at that division is just stunning if you look at the names that he has beaten. So if you put me on the spot, I'm going to say Robert Whittaker just because it's hard for me to see him losing, but I do not feel great about that pick. That's probably the pick I'm shakiest on.
And don't forget, that's also possibly including Tyron Woodley moving up, as he said he would do on Ariel Helwani's show on Monday, moving up to middleweight and possibly challenging for that title before the end of this year. That also kind of puts another monkey wrench in that division. My pick is Israel Adesanya. I think Israel Adesanya is the 185-pound champion in the UFC at the end of 2019. I really do. I think he'll beat Anderson Silva. Yes, I know. I'm breaking kayfabe here. I think he'll win at UFC 224. And I think that'll earn him a title shot. And at some point, we'll see Whittaker versus Adesanya later in the year, most likely in New Zealand or Australia. And I like Adesanya's chances in that fight. I do.
My dog is pacing around in the background, looking like she's gonna poop on my floor. It's real great. Meanwhile,
she does not like me picking against Anderson Silva. That has to be it.
That's definitely what set it off.
Yeah, the world has turned on its axis, Shaun.
It's a new year, Marc. It's a new
year. New year, new me.
So welterweight.
I don't know what that means.
Welterweight now. That's it's an interesting one because it seems like it's kind of obvious what's coming, right? Usman's next. If Woodley gets through that, it's Colby Covington most likely. What's your feelings on welterweight at the end of the year?
I think that Tyron Woodley stands the test of time and remains as the welterweight champion by the end of this year. I feel that way. I think it's going to be a tough road, certainly, but I feel like in both of those matchups, Usman and Covington, Woodley has advantages in multiple areas, whereas both of their strengths are also Woodley's strengths, and neither of them have that one punch knockout power, that stand-up ability, and also that ability to just the experience that Woodley has and his fight IQ and his ability to neutralize the other person's best facet, best attribute. I think Woodley stands the test of time, man. I think so. I think that he'll be one of the longer tenured champions in the UFC. He already is currently, but I think he'll extend that streak this year.
Yeah, it's hard for me to argue against that. I feel like Tyron Woodley is probably going to beat Kamaru Usman, and he's probably going to beat Colby Covington. But I'm going to pick Usman for this category, and I'm going to do so because I think by the end of the year, Tyron Woodley is probably going to be at 185. And so at that point, there's a vacuum that needs to be filled. I feel like Kamaru Usman's that guy. If he loses to Woodley, I feel like somehow, some way, he will be holding the title by the end of the year.
All right, lightweights. Who you got at the end of the year?
You know who I got.
Who do you got?
Tony Ferguson,
Conor McGregor?
Tony Ferguson. Somehow, some way, he is going to get his shot and prove me right. I have backed this train for years. I am not getting off now. Tony Ferguson's your lightweight champ at the end of 2019.
I have a hard time seeing a near future in just 11 months from now where Khabib Nurmagomedov is not the UFC lightweight champion. I have a hard time envisioning the turn of events that would lead to him no longer being the champion. I think he's dominant. I don't think there's anyone in that division right now, based upon recent history, that I like in a fight against him. I think that Khabib is the champ at the end of 2019. I don't even know if Ferguson is going to get that shot. It doesn't seem like they want to go in that direction. Maybe it's posturing. Maybe it's negotiations. But it doesn't look good for your boy Ferguson right now as far as getting that title shot. I like Khabib at the end. In December 2019, I like Khabib as the 155-pound champ in the UFC.
All right. Well, next up, featherweight. I have picked against Max Holloway for the last time, man. I'm on the blessed train. I'm a late comer, but I am on the blessed train, and I am front row. Max Holloway is your champ by the end of 2019. The way he destroyed Brian Ortega, I was there in Toronto, and I was blown away by that performance. I feel as though I understand that the UFC seems to want him to move to lightweight. At this point, I don't understand the urgency to do so. I would like to see him just continue to be the next Jose Aldo, the guy who's owning that division, defending his title multiple times against multiple challengers. I want to just see him run through as many challengers as possible in 2019. I think Max Holloway is that guy.
That would be my pick, except for what you said during that little spiel there. I think that Holloway will move up in 2019. I think he's moving to 155. I think that he'll probably fight Khabib for the title, possibly at some point this year. I don't think he'll be the champion at 145 at the end of 2019. I think that champion will be Brian Ortega. I think Ortega has a great comeback story this year. Returns from that. I mean, look, it was a beating. He took a beating at the hands of Holloway last month in Toronto, and I think he comes back. He wins a fight. Holloway goes up in weight, and then Ortega comes in and slides in and fights the title and wins it. That's my prediction for this year.
Wow, so you don't feel like Max Holloway holds any piece of gold at the end of the year?
And look,
put that up on the chalkboard.
Not because
Marc Raimondi does not believe in you.
That's not true. That's not true. I think that if Holloway stayed at 145, he'd be the guy. But I don't think he'll stay there. I think the UFC wants him to move up. And usually when the UFC wants you to move up, you move up. And he's a company guy. I think he'll do it if they want him to do it. So I think he'll fight for the 55 title. I don't know if he can. I don't know if he beats Khabib. I don't think he does at this juncture. Could be wrong, of course. But because of that, I'm saying he's not the 145-pound champion at the end of the year. If he were to stay at 145, certainly Holloway would be the champ at the end of the year. But if he goes up, which I think he will, which I think they want him to do, he can't be the champion at 145 unless he holds the belt and still goes up. But I'm not sure if that'll be what they do.
He may be a company guy, but he is also a legacy guy. And whenever you hear him talk about Jose Aldo and admitting that Jose Aldo is still the featherweight GOAT to him, it feels as though that is a bridge that he wants to cross before he does anything else.
Wants to make that money, though. Wants to make that money. And I don't see any big time money matchups at 145 for him right now. I feel like he's done pretty much everything he's needed to do in that division. I know Edgar's out there. I know Volkanovski's very good.
Those are the two, man. Those are and Zabit. You got a line of killers coming up.
Sure, but Zabit is still 1 or 2 wins away.
Yeah, fair, but he has time for that because there's still Frankie Edgar and Alexander Volkanovski. But let's continue on. Bantamweight. This to me was my second hardest division to pick outside of middleweight. Where are you going?
I think it's TJ Dillashaw. I don't think this was actually that hard. I think I'm pretty clear that Dillashaw is the guy. Look, he's fighting in a few days, and it's not even for the title. He's not even defending the title. So he's going to be the champion at the end of this weekend, regardless of what happens in the fight. Win or lose, he's the bantamweight champion. So what happens from there, I don't know. What he comes back and he fights once or maybe twice more this year. Who do you think is beating him in the bantamweight division right now? Cody Garbrandt lost 2 in a row to him. I know Marlon Moraes and Rafael Assunção are fighting next month at UFC Fortaleza. The winner of that will most likely fight Dillashaw, but there's no name right now that I think gets the shot in 2019 that can dethrone Dillashaw. Now, there's also a possibility, as has been talked about by Dillashaw and his coach, Dwayne Ludwig, this week, that Dillashaw is interested in moving up to 145 and fighting Max Holloway at some point. So, barring that happening, I feel like Dillashaw is the 135-pound champ at the end of this year.
So I was conflicted on this because I agree with you. I feel like TJ Dillashaw is the most talented fighter at 135. It is hard for me to pick him to be champion at the end of this year, though, because simply for the fact that we already talked about this show, I do not know how this whole 125 experiment will affect him moving forward. If there will be residual effects from having to make this cut down to 125 for the first time. I'm picking TJ Dillashaw, but if there is any sort of difficulty that he experiences after this weight cut, I feel as though Marlon Moraes is a guy who can be in that division and come up and take advantage of that opportunity and steal away that title if TJ Dillashaw makes any wrong moves with this weight cut. So TJ Dillashaw, but Marlon Moraes is my close second if anything happens.
That's fair.
Next up, flyweight. And I don't, my answer to this is there is none. I don't think this division lasts throughout 2019. Are you the same?
Yeah. I don't have a champion at flyweight at the end of 2019. Now, the question, this begs the question, what happens to Henry Cejudo and what happens to Joseph Benavidez? And I guess the easy answer is they'll probably just fight at 135. Yeah. And I guess we have to throw them in that mix. Do we think either one of those guys can beat Dillashaw? To me, if there is no flyweight division, and let's say Dillashaw wins on Saturday. Dillashaw wins the flyweight title. They pretty much do away with the division at that point. Cejudo would move up to 135, and to me, he would only be a win away from a title shot. So he could almost jump the line in a sense to get the 135-pound title shot against Dillashaw in a rematch at 135. It's possible.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's keep it going. Women's featherweight. This is kind of a weird one for me too, because I almost feel that this is the same situation as flyweight. Mm-hmm. Now that Chris Cyborg is no longer champion, this was sort of a placeholder division for her to just be able to compete in the UFC because she's a big name, she attracts big numbers, and no, she is no longer the champion. She only has one fight left on her deal, and she wants that rematch. I don't know that this division is going to exist by the end of 2019.
I don't know either, man. This is a tough one. To me, this is the toughest of this conversation. I don't know. I really don't, because on one hand, yes, Cyborg's contract is coming up. I believe it expires as early as March, and there's only one fight left on it. I'm sure they'll try to negotiate something with her early this year. Does she come back? She's had so many issues with the UFC over the years. The UFC has had issues with her. It seems like there's a lot of baggage and a lot of stuff in the background there, but she is a draw. She is a legitimate draw. People do want to see her fight. At UFC 232 at the Forum, the pop that she got was tremendous. The fan support that she has, especially in Southern California, is excellent. She really has a huge fan base. She really, really does.
She's probably the biggest female draw in the sport.
At this moment, I don't. Yeah, there's no way around that. At this moment, yes, there's 100%. So as much as the UFC probably does not love her, and as much as she doesn't love the UFC, I have a hard time thinking that they'll let her go to Bellator or let her go to Rizin or One Championship, which any one of those any boxing, any promoter would salivate at the idea of getting Chris Cyborg in 2019. So as much as the UFC has had issues with her over the years, I think they're going to have to try to bring her back. They're going to try really hard to do that. In which case, I think that division will still remain because, again, it's the only division that she can compete in. There's no other options. That's the one. It's 145 or bust for her. So if she stays, and I'm inclined to think that she will, there will be a division. So there will be a champion at the end. But my prediction, as of right now, with all this uncertainty, is that there will be no champion. I think Nunes's next fight is, and of course she's the champion now, 145 after beating Cyborg at 232 last month. I think that Nunes goes to 135. She fights and defends that title next. That's my prediction. I think that's what she has said herself. So maybe she fights the winner of Holly Holm and Aspen Ladd. That's a possibility sometime later this year. And then maybe that Cyborg rematch happens toward the end of the year, maybe the second half of the year. But as of right now, I don't know the future of the division, so I have to say there will not be a champion. There will not be a division.
Yeah, my answer is the exact same. I think there will either be no champion whatsoever and really no division, or they eventually will come to that rematch between Amanda Nunes and Chris Cyborg, and Amanda will win again, and she'll end the year still as the featherweight champion. And let's move on to the bantamweight division because I still have her ring in as the bantamweight champion too. So I think maybe I said bantamweight twice there, but let
me cut in and ask you a question here. One more about Cyborg and Nunes. So let's say they do the rematch. Let's say that rematch does happen at 145 and Nunes wins again. Then what do you do? Then what do you do with Chris Cyborg? What do you do?
I don't know
because the division exists pretty much solely for her. And if she's not the champion and she has no path toward getting that title shot again because she's lost twice to the current champion, what the hell do you do then? I don't know.
I mean, Megan Anderson is always still.
Yeah, absolutely.
But other than that, she is literally the only other real featherweight that they have.
The winner of the Ultimate Fighter 28
moved out.
Supposed to fill that featherweight division is moving to bantamweight. I mean, what's the point? Why do they even do that? They could have had a bantamweight season. Why did they do a 145 season when everyone in that season is moving to 135 anyway? It's weird, man. It's weird. Yeah. There's no division.
We got 3 more left. Women's bantamweight for me, it's still Amanda Nunes. She is the queen. I don't feel like anybody in that division is dethroning her. I think Holly Holm's probably the toughest test left for her. But after that, I don't know that there's a lot of difficult challenges. Maybe Aspen Ladd, you can come up and do some big things, but that is the queen's division, and I don't feel like she is falling anytime soon.
Yeah, I co-sign that. I think Nunes is the champ at the end of 19 for sure.
And I think we can say the same about women's flyweight. I mean, are you going to go out on a limb and say Valentina Shevchenko is going to lose?
No.
I feel like Jessica I is your pick, right?
I think that Shevchenko will be the champ at the end. There's always that possibility that Shevchenko moves back up to 135. In fact, I think it's I wouldn't say it's a certainty, but I think it's a very good possibility she moves to 135 again to fight Nunes for a third time, if only because I think that her sister Antonina will climb the rankings and earn a title shot at some point in the next year or two. I think that she's got a ton of potential as well, and they're not going to fight each other. And I think the contingency plan is if Antonina makes it to a number 1 contender fight, then Valentina will move up to 135 again and try to fight Nunes or whoever's the champion there. I think that's their plan.
So you're still picking Shevchenko, though?
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen in 2019. I think that Antonina will probably need at least 2 more wins to get that title shot, but who knows?
My dog is totally going to poop on the floor in front of me.
Can we please get this live on the show?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Last one.
That's just great. That's great television. That's great. That's just pure entertainment.
Women's strawweight.
It would be more entertaining with you cleaning it up, though. That would truly be incredibly entertaining. I would be the Michael Jackson with the popcorn gif.
You are entertained way too easily if you find that entertaining.
I am a pro wrestling fan, so obviously I am entertained very easily.
That is fair. So last one, women's strawweight, and then let's keep moving on. Right now, there is a title fight scheduled between Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, but my pick is coming from neither of those women. I am picking Tatiana Suarez. I think she has what it takes in this division. She has an unparalleled skill set when it comes to the grappling and the wrestling game. I really feel as though she is almost basically the female Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I think she is stylistic kryptonite to Rose Namajunas if she is able to get to Rose. Jessica Andrade would be a lot tougher of a fight in my eyes, but I think Tatiana Suarez is going to be champion in this division sooner rather than later.
100% agree. I think that she needs one more win probably to get a title shot. I think Namajunas versus Andrade in Brazil later this year will be a fantastic fight. I'm looking forward to that one a lot because I don't really know what will happen. Andrade is just a beast. She's an animal. Look what she did to Claudia Gadelha. I mean, who does that to Claudia Gadelha? That was
Look at
crazy.
what she did to Karolina Kowalkiewicz. That
knocked her out with one punch. Who's doing that at 115?
That might be the most violent one-punch female knockout that I have ever remembered, to be honest.
At 115, certainly. There have been violent cyborg knockouts and that sort of thing, but at 115, oh yeah.
The way she deaded her was just
crazy. Yeah. So that'll be a great fight. And then Suarez is obviously waiting in the wings. I don't think anyone has any delusions about that the other way. I think that Suarez is definitely the next in line after that. And yeah, I like her in either one of those fights because, she, like you said, that wrestling pedigree. There's no one like her at 115. I really like I like her in the future. She's still young. I think that she can be a dominant champion in that division. I really do.
Well, hey, let's keep it going. We spent a lot of time on that one, so let's try to get through all of the questions as we can, or as many as we can. I'm sorry, today. So next one's coming up from Lucian again, monopolizing the questions today.
Lucian.
UFC passing Covington. And so this happened while we were gone. So let's talk a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Right. I'm somewhat torn on the current UFC welterweight challenger situation, the UFC passing Colby Covington, even with all the limited information we have. In many ways, I understand how this places the championships in a questionable position and what it says about the UFC or what the UFC places value on. I've especially thought that our own Luke Thomas has touched on a lot of that stuff brilliantly. However, to me, the thing preventing me from fully feeling sympathy here for Colby is Covington himself. Not because of his antics, but because he was one of the first people starting this by winning the interim title because the UFC didn't want to wait for Woodley for a couple months more. That is why his complaints ring hollow, as this feels like a situation of you reap what you sow. Do you feel like I am being too harsh on Covington in this situation? How do you feel about his position in this particular situation? So, Marc, just very quickly, I mean, obviously at this point, it is a little bit of old news, but Colby Covington was passed over by Kamaru Usman for this title shot. Do you feel like he got a raw deal?
Only the UFC can make Colby Covington a sympathetic figure. I mean, are you kidding me? Yeah, Colby is right. I mean, look, I can't believe I'm starting 2019 by saying these words, but Colby Covington is right. Colby is right. He has a legitimate gripe against the UFC. He was the interim champion. That was the fight that they put together. That was the fight that he won. He beat Dos Anjos last year at UFC 225. He was the interim champion. He was supposed to get the title shot against Woodley last year before Darren Till jumped the line in a way to fight Woodley, and Covington did not get that shot then because he had some health issues. And I think in this case, it's more of a negotiation issue where I think that what the UFC did and what they've done before is they've pitted the two contenders against one another, and they took whoever was going to give them the better deal as far as money-wise. Basically, who's going to take the least amount of money. This is speculation, but I think Covington was playing a hard ball. I think Covington thought that his fight against Woodley was a big fight, and I don't think he's wrong. I think that he's right about that. I think that he was trying to negotiate a higher price point, and the UFC said, well, we got someone waiting in the wings, and Covington didn't budge, and they went with Usman. That is my feeling as to what happened there, because everyone thought that Covington was the next in line. He was the interim champ. I mean, he's beaten all the guys essentially that Usman has beaten. So I think he has an absolute point there. I think it shows that, again, if you have any kind of leverage against the UFC or with the UFC, you have to use it, whether you be the champion or not, because obviously with Usman coming up, Covington lost the leverage that he did have as the interim champ, the former interim champ, and as the number one contender. And look, to be fair here, I don't think Usman is an undeserving contender. I think he's right there with Covington as far as deserving the title shot. But Covington was there first. Covington did those things first. He beat those guys first. He was the interim champion. And to me, I think Woodley Covington is a bigger fight from a marketing perspective. For better or worse, I think that it could have been a very ugly lead up and a very ugly build up. But I think as far as money wise, I think that's a bigger fight for the UFC. Maybe they didn't feel that way. Maybe they didn't feel that way. But to me it was, and I understand Colby's thinking. Well, yes, I understand Colby Covington's thinking. I can't believe I just said that.
Well, it certainly is the bigger fight, right? I think the question, though, really is how much of a bigger fight is it? And I think that's kind of the question that the UFC figured out internally within themselves as they figured this out. Because Colby, it seems as though from the outside, I mean, we can only hear from what we hear from the fighters and the managers, and we're not on the inside. It feels as though Colby made the UFC's life a little difficult over the past 8 months. Just in a couple different ways. And I wonder if at a certain point the UFC said, yeah, obviously that fight is a little bigger than the Usman fight, but is it really big enough to where we're going to take an actual hit on this, like a hit that you can actually feel? Like, I don't think Woodley Covington sells 600,000 pay-per-view buys or anything like that. It probably lands maybe 350, something like that. I think Woodley Usman will probably hit 250. I don't know that that's a big enough difference for the UFC to really care. And it will be interesting because because Colby Covington is still the interim welterweight champion. As far as we know, he still has that title.
He's not.
He hasn't been stripped of the title. He is still on the official UFC whatever. He is still on the official UFC whatever.
I thought that once Till got the title shot, he was no longer the interim champ.
No, he is still listed on UFC.com as the interim welterweight champion.
What?
And so if that continues, I mean, we have not heard any news of Colby Covington stripped of X title, this and that. If that continues, Tyron Woodley will have defended his title twice against the guy who isn't the interim champion before maybe he eventually fights the interim champion. And it's all just such a perfect representation of how little these things matter at this point in 2019, because it doesn't matter, because Colby Covington's interim title was, sorry to say, a fake interim title from the beginning. Tyron Woodley was healthy a month afterwards. They just needed, we talked about it a lot at the time, they just needed a spot on the calendar that they had to fill, and that was it. And that was
the only... Are you telling me that the title that Colby Covington brought to the White House and gave to Donald Trump was a fake title? Is that what you're telling me?
It was one of the fakest titles that the UFC has ever given out. And I think we can agree on that because, again, Tyron Woodley was healthy in July. They just needed a fight for June. So obviously Colby got a raw deal. I just don't know. It sucks, and I feel bad for him, but it's not surprising. I don't think any part of this is surprising.
Interim titles didn't mean a whole lot in the first place, and now they mean next to nothing.
They used to mean a little bit. They used to mean a little bit. Now they mean absolutely nothing. When who were the last few interim title holders? Tony Ferguson and Colby Covington.
They don't mean anything.
They didn't get their title shot.
Look, the interim title only means anything on the day of that fight. And then after that, all bets are off. It no longer guarantees fighters a title shot. That used to be, okay, the interim title, you could say, at least I'm the number one contender. I'm the interim champ. Does that mean anything? Not really, but at least I am the number one contender. Now, nah, you're not even that. You're nothing.
Yeah.
You're just a guy. You're a guy with a fake belt.
Tony Ferguson had to fight another fight after he was interim champion, and he still might not get his title shot. He had to beat Anthony Pettis, and he might have to fight somebody else before he gets his title shot. It looks as though Colby Covington is probably going to have to fight somebody else now in the interim. And it's where we have landed in 2019, man. You said it best with your very first sentence that you said at the beginning of this, where only the UFC can make Colby Covington a sympathetic figure. And they really have, which is quite remarkable, to be honest. But I mean, that's the game we play at this point, right?
Anyway, moving on. Speaking of the UFC, from Matt the Dunk, Greg Hardy as the co-main event of the first ESPN card, question mark, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point. What do you all think about his big UFC debut being the co-main event of the very first ESPN event? I don't want to rehash all things Greg Hardy, but it's just pretty remarkable that they picked a 3-0 fighter for that slot. Do you all think that was a UFC decision or an ESPN decision? It's all strange to me because on one hand, Hardy is the co-main event, so you think they're really pushing him. But on the other hand, he's explicitly not doing open workouts or the Thursday press conference. Shaun, thoughts about Greg Hardy versus Alan Crowder being the co-main event at UFC on ESPN +1?
I mean, we've talked about this a lot at this point, so I'm not going to rehash it too much. But obviously, it's ridiculous, right? Like he's making his UFC debut. It seems it was a UFC decision. It wasn't an ESPN decision.
100,000%.
Yeah.
Not an ESPN.
And it's from what I've heard, there was initial pushback from Disney and UFC about that decision. Obviously, it ended up meaning nothing.
Disney and ESPN about that decision.
Yeah, obviously ended up meaning nothing because he is still on this card as the co-main event. And I think it really just comes down to they know that Greg Hardy is a name that ESPN people will know. ESPN fans who are not MMA fans know the name Greg Hardy, probably for the wrong reasons, absolutely for the wrong reasons, but they definitely know him. And the idea, it's simple, man. You just you put the name out there that people are aware of, and maybe they'll have that sort of intrigue of, hey, I remember this guy. he's a bit of a dick. Let's to put it lightly. Maybe let's watch him get knocked out. That type of thing. It's pretty obvious what they're doing, and I think also by not overly promoting him, not putting him on the press conference or not putting him on open workouts, the UFC is trying to shield it in some respect of we're not going overboard with it. But it's pretty obvious on all fronts what's going on.
So I think there are a few elements here. I think that this is a weirdly structured card because there's the main card on ESPN Plus, but there are also fights on the prelims on big ESPN. So I think if this were a normal card that we were used to seeing on pay-per-view or Big Fox or FS1, what have you, I think that in almost every other case, you would get Cowboy Cerrone versus Alex Hernandez as the co-main event. But because the prelims are on big ESPN, they wanted a name like Cowboy and a good fight and a big fight in Cerrone versus Hernandez as the main event of the prelims. That's not a prelim fight, obviously. We know Cowboy Cerrone is not a prelim fighter. He's in many cases a headline or a co-headline fighter. So I think that is also part of why Hardy is the co-main event, because what would have been the co-main event is now on big ESPN on the prelims. So that's part of it. Also part of it, I think, is that when I think at this point, if you're Dana White, when people push back against certain decisions that you make, like signing Greg Hardy and putting Greg Hardy on the same card as Rachel Ostovich, he's going to push back even harder. He's going to push back even harder and put Greg Hardy in a prominent place. I think that he gives 0 Fs at this point. I think he's at that point where he has no real consequences. What are they going to do? Fire him? The guy's already made him money. The guy's already made a boatload of money, and he's pretty much going to own the libs in a sense. He's going to own the libs, and he's going to push back even harder if you push back against him. He does not give an F, and that's why Greg Hardy, I think, is the co-main event for those two reasons.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the last thing you said there with that last point, because I was in Toronto when this was sort of becoming a big discussion point, and seeing Dana White's progression throughout the week as he answered question after question to Greg Hardy, he really dug in. By the end of the week, he was so just done talking about it. And it's like, this is what's going to happen. I don't care what you guys say. I think that's a very good point that I hadn't thought of, but
he doesn't care. He does not care. that's how it is. He doesn't care. All right, let's move on to the next one. Back to the MMA fighting comments from Ian McInerney. Ian. From Ian. Most wanted fights, apart from Khabib versus Ferguson, what 3 fights would you make in the UFC if given free reign as the matchmaker?
So I like this question. I love any sort of preview for the year type of question like this. So I love this question. I've come up with 5. I'm an overachiever. You may have 3, but I got 5, Mark. And
I actually have 5 too. I actually have 7. I actually have 7.
Oh, look at that. Look at you putting me in my place. I like it. So I'm going to start with my 5, and then I'll just do this super quickly, and then I'll go to you. Cormier versus Jon Jones at heavyweight. That is my number 1. That is my number 1. That will continue to be my number 1. I need to see that fight. I feel as though the trilogy or the rivalry is unsettled, and I think Daniel Cormier's best division is heavyweight. He already fought Jon Jones as Jon Jones' best division. I would like to see that at heavyweight just to add a sense of finality to that rivalry that I really feel has defined this era of mixed martial arts outside of Conor McGregor type of things. The next 4, let's go through them quickly. Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya. I really can't wait for this fight. I hope it happens. I hope we get it in some sense. Even Israel versus Kelvin would be good. I just want to see Israel against one of those 2 guys. I want to see how good he really is. You had talked about you think he's going to be champion by the end of 2019. That wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. I just want to see it. I want to see him tested against one of these type of guys. Next, Jon Jones versus Yoel Romero at light heavyweight.
Whoa.
I would love to see this fight so much. Yoel Romero feels as though he would be a perfect light heavyweight at this point in his career. And that is a type of challenge that I don't think Jon Jones has within his own division right now. You look at up and down that roster. I don't know that Anthony Smith is great. Thiago Santos is great. I don't know that either of those guys would present the same problems as Yoel Romero. Last two would be Dustin Poirier versus either Khabib or for Tony Ferguson. I just want to see that man get a shot at the top. He has put together a run, really an incredible run, unlike few others in this sport at 155, which is really the hardest division in the entire sport. He has rebuilt his career from his time at featherweight. So incredibly well done. I want to see him get that shot at one of the top guys. And last but not least, Aaron Pico. I want to see how he fares against Patricio Pitbull. I want to see it. At this point, I am sold on the kid, man. The way he dismantled Leandro Higo, who was a legitimate title challenger, maybe at bantamweight, sure, but still, he is a legitimately good fighter. And Aaron Pico tore through him like it was nothing. I want to see Aaron Pico versus Patricio Pitbull for the title at Bellator.
I am very excited for Aaron Pico versus Henry Corrales next week in LA at the Forum. That's going to be fire. Do not blink in that fight. That's gonna be a lot of fun. As far as my list, I too went with Jones versus DC at heavyweight as my first pick. But as the weeks go by now, I don't know if that is going to happen. So in lieu of that, if that does not go down as I wish it would, Jon Jones versus Brock Lesnar.
You Marc. You're such a Marc.
Why? What? I think that's super interesting. You would not want to see Jon Jones, probably the best of all time, go up in weight class and fight that monster Brock Lesnar, a man who's gonna be outweighing him by 40 pounds on fight night. Come on, that's intriguing as hell.
I'm fascinated by any Jon Jones fight at heavyweight. I just want to see how he fares in that division. But I have never understood the obsession with Brock Lesnar, to be honest. I do not understand the sort of fetishization. I don't know. People fetishize him very much in MMA, and I just
look at that man. He is a unit. He's an absolute freaking unit. Shaun.
I'm over it, man. He treats our sport with disdain. He comes over here and cheats blatantly and then leaves, and it's just like, man, I'm over you. Like
UFC treats the sport with disdain. Get out of here with that.
Nah, man. I'm over that. He's in his mid-40s. He's gonna lose regardless. I don't care about that.
I am all in on Jones versus Lesnar in 2019. If the DC fight doesn't happen for either one of them, I love that fight in the future at any point.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. My second fight is Conor McGregor versus Anderson Silva.
Oh my God.
I would love
an aneurysm.
I would love to see that fight. But I'm just messing around. I don't think that a fight will actually happen. I would not object to it, as we've gone over many times here. But my real pick is Conor McGregor versus Al Iaquinta. I think that fight has legs. I think that fight will be promoted extremely well. I think they've already started a little bit on Twitter over the last few weeks. I like that fight a lot. I'd be pretty excited if that does go down. I think that Al would be a tremendous foil for McGregor in many ways. Also on my list, we were talking about it a few minutes ago, Cyborg versus Nunes too. I mean, I think they have to do this fight. I can't imagine them not doing that rematch. Maybe it's not next. Maybe Nunes goes down to 35 again, defends her belt there. But to me, that makes too much sense to go back and do that again. It has to. I think it's a much bigger fight the second time around. You can do that in Brazil. I mean, to me, that's the main event in Curitiba. They're trying to do the big stadium in Curitiba. To me, that's the main event. I mean, or at least on the card, at least the co-main event. I think that's a huge fight for both women, and it would be the biggest fight of either of their careers in terms of money, I believe. Going down my list a little more, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Max Holloway. Now, I know that you want Holloway to stay at 145, but that matchup, which we almost saw last April, that is so intriguing to me. that is almost like it's like the new GOAT fight. Like if you don't consider Jon Jones the greatest of all time, and maybe he's into his 30s now, and maybe he's not at the twilight of his career by any means, but maybe toward the end of his prime, I think these are the next guys that we'll be talking about in 10 years, 15 years as two of the best ever to do it. And I would love to see them clash at 155 this year, or anytime really. And then last, and I know maybe I'm crazy and it'll probably never happen, but part of me still wants to see George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. Part of me still wants to see it. I don't think it'll ever happen. I really don't, but I don't think George wants it. It seems like Silva does want it, but the fan in me that was wanting that fight so bad like 8 years ago, I mean, I still would not mind seeing that in 2019, 2020. I think it makes sense in many ways for both of them to do it at 180 or whatever. I'm so down for that fight still, even now in 2019.
Only 2 Anderson Silva fights. I'm proud of you, man.
I mean, I had to kind of cross off his name in all my matchups just so I could make it more presentable for the broadcast for the show. But two's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's keep things rolling. Next up, coming from Farah Puere.
Yeah, something like that. Puere.
I can't pronounce any of that. In your opinion, how would Ryan Bader fare in the UFC's heavyweight division? Do you think he would ever return to the promotion if he was granted an instant title shot? I'm tipping Bader, but hoping Fedor wins. So this is an interesting conversation. I think one we've had in the past, so I won't dwell on it too long. But man, Ryan Bader at heavyweight seems to be a revelation. I mean, he seems to be very comfortable there, and he is certainly not a small heavyweight. How would he fare in the UFC? I would throw him in the top 10, man. Right now, the number 10 guy is Justin Willis. Do you think Ryan Bader beats Justin Willis if they fight? Would you favor Ryan Bader?
I think, yeah. I mean, I would probably favor him. I don't know what I like Willis, and I think he's going to get better, and I think that he'll have a big 2019. But right now, yeah, I would probably favor Ryan Bader in that fight. I think Bader will beat Fedor. I am interested and intrigued by that fight next week at Bellator 214 again in LA. Yeah, I mean, I like Bader a lot as a heavyweight. I mean, he's looked so good in this tournament. He's looked absolutely dominant. I mean, Matt Mitrione is a guy that, okay, he was not really near a title shot in the UFC, but certainly he was very competitive in the UFC.
Very respected.
He lost some.
Very respected heavyweight.
Yeah, respected heavyweight. He did quite well over the years in the UFC. Had some big wins in the UFC. Ryan Bader completely dominated him. I mean, it was a mauling. And Mitrione is a bigger man, but Bader was able to use his wrestling, which at heavyweight looks oppressive. I mean, it looks almost like a Cain Velasquez, his former ASU teammate, in some ways. He's a smaller man than Cain, but there are some similarities between that MMA wrestling. I like Bader at heavyweight. I wish he had given that a try, and I wish that he would continue on in that division a little bit. I think that after this tournament, he's probably going to go down to light heavyweight again and defend there. But yeah, I think he's definitely a top 10 heavyweight in the world. I don't think there's any doubt.
Yeah. And to answer briefly the second part of this question, I feel as though he's enjoying himself so much in Bellator, the freedom he sort of gets to dictate his career and take chances and, really get opportunities he wouldn't get in the UFC. Maybe if they offer him a title shot at heavyweight and it's a title shot, that would be what it would take to get him back. But otherwise, I don't see him coming back. I feel as though he's really enjoying himself.
Yeah. I mean, who knows what the future will hold? I mean, it's a crapshoot.
The UFC isn't breaking the bank to bring Ryan Bader back.
Most likely not. And he has a lot of good sponsors. He's got a lot of good sponsors who have stuck with him over the years, even when he was in the UFC and could no longer wear them on his shorts, and they're still with him now, and he gets paid decent money from them. So yeah, I think Bellator is a good fit.
Yeah. What's next? All
right, back to the MMA fighting comments from the same commenter, Farah Puere, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly either. But the question is, Spike greater than Fox, the greater than sign Fox. Which era do you think was superior for production value and for the fights? I guess meaning Spike or Fox.
So that's an interesting question, man. And I've been kind of thinking about this a lot on my own, just as we approach sort of whatever this new era, this new ESPN era is going to be. Because MMA is so weird, right? Because we are really still, the sport is still so much in its infancy that we see these chapters play out in real time where we can really put actual markers down, book markers down of like, here's the end of one era, here's the beginning of the other, let's assess it. I don't know that you can get that really in a sport that's been around a long time, like football or basketball or anything like that. And so it's interesting, the question, what was better, the production and the fights between the two eras? For me, I think the answer is twofold, right? Because for the fights of the Fox era, in my mind, far surpass the Spike era. And I feel as though the same will probably be said of the ESPN era when this is all done and everything is wrapped up several years from now as well. And I think that's just the nature of a sport this young, really. One, like I said, that's just kind of in its infancy because the sport is evolving in real time with techniques and best practices and just like general stewardship from all sides, from coaches, fighters, even the promotion itself, the UFC. Everyone is figuring out how to do this better in some capacity. Maybe things are getting worse in some capacities as well, but just in general, the quality of the fighters has gotten so much better. And the evolution of the fighters has gotten so intriguing with the new nuances that pop up every year. If you take the average, 40th ranked lightweight now, and you put him against the average 40th ranked lightweight at the beginning of or at the end of the Spike era, dude would get blown out. Like the current, whatever the current iteration of that fighter is, would ruin the one from 7 years ago. It's just the evolution in the sport. So in that respect, I think the fights of the Fox era, there are so many. You could write a book about all of the incredible fights just that happened over that 7-8 years. In terms of production, though, I lean towards the Spike era. And I don't even know that has anything to do with production itself, because I think the production quality objectively improved leaps and bounds over the course of the Fox era. It just became a more professional, better presentation and less, new metal and the very late 90s shtick that we were stuck in for a while with Spike. But I think I would pick the Spike era just because over the course of the Fox, tenure, the sport became so much more homogenized and everything just trended towards that. Everything became very cookie cutter, and a lot of that wasn't even Fox's doing. That's just sort of the things that have been brought into the sport, with the Reebok deal being a very big one, and the uniforms and the cutting out of sponsors and just the cutting out of the uniqueness. I feel like we had a lot more characters back 7 years ago than we do now. And that's just really because it's harder now to really show your personality as a fighter on fight night, because you can't make interesting walkouts. You can't do anything unique with your dress or your attire, really. It's all very strapped down, and everybody looks more or less like a creative fighter from the UFC video game in a lot of respects. And that, to me, hurts. That's unfortunate. I mean, everybody's talked about it at this point, but that's just unfortunate, because I feel like that was one of the coolest aspects of this sort of sport in this industry, is how many unique voices and characters we had that had built up, that really built something for themselves. And I feel like a lot of that was lost over the 7 or 8 years we were on Fox.
I think it's hard to compare both eras because, to me, they were vastly different. Spike was in a younger part of the UFC MMA evolution, and FS1 was kind of the jump that the UFC made to, I don't want to say mainstream, but regular cable television programming. I mean, we're talking about a jump from a handful of fights per year on Spike to 30 something fights on FS1 every year, 40 plus fights events total for the UFC and over the last few years while they were on Fox and FS1. I think it's very hard to judge because the quality of the Spike broadcast used to be much higher because there were fewer fights as far as the depth of cards go. Whereas in the FS1 and the Fox era, UFC doing 40 events a year, 12, 13 fights per event. And of course, it's going to be a little bit more watered down, especially down at the end of those cards. And I know that everyone has a problem, and most of the problem with the
if I can really quickly, I would push back a little bit against that because I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of people say that. And if you look back on a lot of those spike cards, there were a lot of stinkers, man. Like I think we kind of glorify that era a little bit when it comes to card quality because there was a lot of cards that were really, really lackluster.
True. And the UFC used to stack the pay-per-views like very, very heavy. Like the prelims of pay-per-views used to be like real stacked before they started going to 30, 40 plus events per year.
Sometimes, but sometimes you would get Chris Lieben headlining the pay-per-view against Mike Bisping or something, you know?
Yeah.
Like there were still exceptions. I feel like we speak of it as if there was this hard and fast that era was so much better in that regard, but I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, well, that's fair point. And I know people complain about the pacing of the FS1 cards and uh, how long they take and how late they start. I think there's even a question on the MMA fighting comments today for the show about why are these cards starting so late on the East Coast. That's really more, I think, of a UFC thing. The UFC still does the production. They still produce all these shows. So I think that's more on them than it is on Fox and FS1. But it's very hard to compare, I think, and especially with the UFC kind of carrying that load production wise. I think that really it ultimately is the UFC evolving more than the networks itself.
Yeah. Well, hey, what's next?
All right, back to the comments. From Matt the Dunk again. Big prediction for the ESPN era. Is it a success or failure 5 years from now? Looking 5+ years down the road, do you think the ESPN deal will be looked at as a smashing success, i.e. MMA as a true mainstream American sport on par with football or basketball? Or will last-minute fight cancellations, mainstream audience distaste for human cockfighting, etc., add up over the years and make ESPN ultimately regret the deal?
So that's an interesting question, and that's sort of the big question as we move into this new era, right? And I'm interested to see sort of the initial changes that we're going to see over the course of this year, just in terms of whether a new audience can be brought to this. Because
Right.
I can only speak anecdotally because me and you, we are so far into the forest that I don't think we get a good sense of the trees of how small this still really is.
Mm-hmm.
And so anecdotally speaking, a lot of my friends, they love sports, they love basketball, football, et cetera, et cetera. They don't really care much about MMA, but they still consume most of their sports content on ESPN.
Yep.
And ESPN historically has not shown much of an interest in showing UFC highlights or Bellator highlights on, say, a Sports Center, or doing an MMA segment on Sports Center, or an MMA show, even that sort of thing. I wonder, now that this partnership has started, and it really does feel like ESPN is going all in to promote the sport and to promote this really large investment that they've made. Now that this is going to start popping up on SportsCenter, we're going to see our old friend Ariel Helwani doing various shows on SportsCenter, and they're going to be showing UFC highlights and previewing UFC fights on SportsCenter. I wonder if people like my friends who anecdotally don't care about this, but do care about whatever ESPN tells them to care about, whether that will start seeping into their lives, and it will really become sort of this wave that will slowly get like this new sense of fan, a new more mainstream fan coming to this sport. I don't know that will happen. I feel as though there's still a barrier to entry to the sport, just inherently with A, how brutal it is, but also B, how complex it is. With, you got 12 champions over here and interim champions there, and X fight card may have 12 fights that don't matter and one that do. It's very difficult to understand if you're just coming to it new as a new viewer, a new fan. But I am very, very, very curious to see just the effect of how the UFC being placed in such a mainstream spotlight really does affect this moving forward. So I can only see this being a success. I think for it to be a failure, some really insane stuff would have to happen. Somebody would have to die in the cage, or the injuries would just have to become so outrageous that the card switches and everything just becomes untenable. So I can only see it being a success. My question is, how much of a success is it going to be in 5 years from now? Does the sport look very different with a very different audience than it is currently?
As far as Matt the Donk's question, I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. I don't think it'll be a complete failure where ESPN regrets even getting the deal. I also don't think it's going to be a mainstream sport on par with football and basketball. I don't think that will ever happen. And
Agreed.
that's okay. And that's okay because the UFC makes money hand over fist even when they're not on par with football and basketball. I think they're even okay with that never happening. The one question that I have, and I think that your points about MMA and the UFC being on SportsCenter more and being on ESPN and having more of a higher profile will be very good. The question for me is, outside of that, next year, or I guess this year now, 30 plus events, 30 plus UFC events will be behind a paywall. That's 12 pay-per-views and I believe 20 ESPN Plus cards. So only 10 events this year, less than one a month, will be accessible on cable television on big ESPN. And those might be big events. But the bulk, for the first time ever, I mean, at least the first time since when they were only pay-per-view structured years ago. But this is a little bit of a new horizon where if you want to watch the UFC, you got to pay for it. You got to pay for pay-per-view, or you got to pay for ESPN Plus. Now, ESPN Plus offers a ton of other stuff, I guess, at this point. There's boxing, there's a bunch of other sports on there, but it'll be interesting to see how and if the audience can grow when there is a paywall affixed to watching the UFC product. That, to me, is the big question over the next 5 years.
Is it really a new horizon, though? Because I feel like being a MMA fan, and especially a UFC fan, is the most expensive fandom you can have, just historically. Like, even the past several years, if you're a UFC fan, you're paying for UFC Fight Pass.
Yeah.
You're paying for all these pay-per-views, which are not cheap. And Fox Sports 1 and Fox Sports 2, especially when they had that, when they were on those channels, at least in Arizona, those channels you have to pay extra to get. And I'm sure worldwide there are different deals for different countries. Yeah. So some countries you have to pay for, a subscription service to get that said channel. But overall, generally, just to even be a UFC fan, it has been very expensive over the last several years. Certainly. Over the last decade. And that's not even including paying for DAZN if you want to watch Bellator, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I think that barrier to entry, just in terms of a paywall, is going to be less of a big deal because MMA fans are just already trained to pay for this product.
But I'm not talking about people who are current MMA fans. I'm talking about if you have DirecTV, you get FS1, and you get Spike TV. So as a non-fan, you may stumble upon a UFC event as you're flipping through the channels, or it's just on and you see it and you put it on. That will be much less frequent nowadays with ESPN Plus. You actually have to seek it out. It's going to be very hard to stumble upon the UFC. Now, True. Only 10 events per year on a Saturday night on ESPN. I think it's ultimately it'll be a good thing, but maybe not as much of a good thing as far as growth of an audience as some people think it will be, because again, cable television, the UFC has been on cable now for 7 years in Fox plus the Spike years. So there was that possibility of audience growth that way. And I don't know if that will exist on a streaming service, because streaming services, even though they are without a doubt the future, I think that most people, period, as far as population goes, are not going to get ESPN Plus. They're not going to have it. Most people still have cable, and they can stumble upon a UFC and become a fan that way. But we'll see. Maybe in the next 5 years, that could change as well.
True. That's fair. Although I would counter by, you say that it's going to be harder to stumble upon a UFC event. That is absolutely true, because you're right. I would say the majority of the population does not have ESPN Plus, and even at the end of this year won't. I do think it will be easier, though, to stumble upon the idea of the UFC as a whole, just
on ESPN programming
over this year. And we've already seen it where, during the national championship game in college football, these poor guys, these announcers are reading promos for Henry Cejudo versus TJ Dillashaw and obviously have no idea what the hell they're reading. They don't understand anything they're saying, but they're still reading them, and they're still spending time in the middle of a game where X million of people are watching to promote the UFC. So I do think in that regard, it will just become more common for people to see the UFC in front of their eyes. And I don't know what effect that's going to have, especially with it all being behind a paywall. But I think it'll be an interesting experiment to just watch moving forward of can that sort of business not only succeed, but flourish and really bring more of an audience. Because you may be entirely right in that regard.
I mean, I do tend to be right, but we'll move on from here.
Well,
Back to the comments. SJY from the MMA fighting comment section. Lighter weight classes or lighter weight class. I think we touched on this a little bit.
Yeah,
so
I think we already answered the question for the most part.
We can go kind of quick. And the last 4 champ versus champ fights: McGregor versus Alvarez, GSP versus Bisping, DC versus Stipe, Nunes versus Cyborg. The UFC in the UFC, the fighter from the lighter weight class has won. Do you think this is a good sign for Henry? Does the fact that TJ is coming down give him an even bigger edge? I want to cut in here that earlier on in the conversation, we were talking about fighters going down, not being normally going down in weight and having success, but our friends on MMA Fighting on our Slack have kind of called us out and said we forgot BJ Penn, Jessica Andrade, Jeremy Stevens, and others. Thank you, Alex Cayley, Jose Youngs, and Danny Segura for reminding us about those names. But
I push back against that. I push back against that in a lot of ways. BJ Penn was a completely different era. That doesn't really apply at this point in a modern MMA sense. What were the others? Jessica Andrade and Jeremy Stevens. Neither of them have won titles. They have sort of established themselves as contenders, and especially for Jessica Andrade's case, she is the top contender, so maybe she is the outlier. But Jeremy Stevens is still basically in the same place that he was at lightweight. He was a guy who would win a lot of fights, and he would lose fights when it was against a certain level of competition. I don't know that his career trajectory has changed much by moving down in weight. So I disagree with that. I push back against that.
All right. Fair enough.
Because we noted that we were specifically talking about at the top 1% world-class level of championship level fighters to move down in weight. And I still haven't heard one yet.
Right. Any thoughts on the lighter weight class having more success as far as super fights go in the UFC, at least recently?
No, I mean, I think we already touched on a lot of this. I'm just interested to see what TJ Dillashaw we get. I really hope we get the best TJ Dillashaw.
Also, one thing worth noting about all 4 of those examples is that in just about every case, it was a fighter moving up in weight and fighting the champion at that higher weight, whereas this is the champion at the higher weight coming down and fighting the champion at the lower weight. So to me, this is a whole different deal.
That was literally the question. You just rephrased the question.
Oh, all right. So there you go. We're in agreement. Moving on. Back to SJY. Teammates. How far away is Kane from a title shot? It's very unlikely he'll fight DC, but if it happened, who would you pick to win? Is there any other fights that would have been great to see, but didn't happen because the fighters were teammates? GSP versus Rory comes to mind.
GSP versus Rory, it was always sort of the example that pops in my head, but
to me, that was never a fight that really should have happened at any point.
I mean, it would have been interesting to see, but I understand where you're coming from. But in the sense of Cain Velasquez, he's one fight away from fighting for that vacant title, whenever that sort of thing happens. And I have just been so impressed with the way that AKA has handled the past few years, because they have really set this up to where there is never even a question of whether Cain Velasquez and DC are going to fight. Cain Velasquez sat out this entire 2018 campaign, basically allowing Daniel Cormier to fulfill his dream, his ambitions of becoming sort of this legendary 2-division champion. And now it is perfectly set up. It is no coincidence, whether Cain will not tell you this, but it is no coincidence that Cain Velasquez is coming back right now, just as DC is about to exit through the exit door. They have set this up perfectly for DC to pass the torch to Cain Velasquez on his way out. And I am just so impressed by the ability of that camp to navigate those sort of waters without any sort of tumultuous period, any sort of period of jealousy, of infighting, of bitterness. They have really written the book on how to do this sort of thing as a camp and navigate it while still keeping everything in-house and keeping all the relationships good. I expect big things from Cain Velasquez in 2019.
Agreed. And I will add one more thing, because we were trying to get through this quick. There could be an instance of this coming up that's not DC versus Cain, and that is Askren and Tyron Woodley. If Ben Askren were to beat Robbie Lawler coming up in March, there will be calls for him to fight Woodley for the welterweight title, and that is just not going to happen. They were teammates in college at Missouri. Askren is a teammate and a coach of Woodley. They've said explicitly, both of them, there's no way they'd fight each other. But there will be calls for it, certainly, if Askren has success in the welterweight division, which I'm inclined to think that he will.
And I think that also plays into Tyron now talking similar discussion that we just said with Kane and DC, where maybe he'll move up to middleweight and clear that way for Ben.
Yep. Back to the comments from.
Let's move to Twitter, man. We're running out of time, and we got to start getting some Twitter questions.
Sure, I'm down with that. What do you got?
All right, I will start us up with coming from Tragic Bronson on Twitter. He wants to know about Pettis versus Wonderboy, which is a fight we just was basically more or less finalized. Thoughts? I personally like the fight stylistically. However, I am concerned about Pettis' durability, considering he's broken his hands multiple times at 155 pounds. So Pettis versus Wonderboy, man, this is one I did not see coming. I don't think a lot of people did. They've kind of made this matchup themselves. They sort of got some social media push behind it, and the UFC ended up acquiescing and letting them do it. What do you think of this fight?
I mean, I don't know what to think, honestly, because
right, that's sort of where I'm at. I don't know that I like
because it certainly. I was surprised to hear that it was even being talked about, because we were talking about Pettis. He fought at 145. He's never been a big 155er. It's very possible that as he gets older now, he's just getting heavier, and that's just that's a natural occurrence for people as they get into their late 20s and early 30s. But it's just a fight that I didn't really have on my radar, to be honest with you. And Wonderboy is not a big 170 either, but he'll have a weight difference against he'll have a weight advantage against Pettis, certainly. I don't know. It seems weird. It seems out of the blue, and it doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense. Is Pettis going to stay at 170? Is that the future for him? I don't know if that makes sense either. Look, the guy fought incredibly well against Tony Ferguson, who, in your mind, is the best lightweight in the world. So I don't think Pettis is far off at lightweight. I don't know. At 170, I feel like if he runs into a big wrestler like a Woodley, it would be a not that they would fight because they're teammates, but that will present a big problem for him, I think. So I don't know. I have no idea what to think of that fight. It seems like a fun fight in the moment, but as far as like what will happen, like how does it set up the future, I have no clue.
That's the thing, man, is it seems like a somewhat fun fight in the moment, but I don't know that Anthony Pettis is viable at 170 pounds. He was already getting out wrestled pretty hard at 155 by a lot of different guys. 170 has a lot of monsters who walk around 200 pounds, man. Like that is... Yep. That is a big ask for Anthony Pettis, and his career trajectory is interesting, man. Because when he was in WEC, he was a lightweight who did not struggle whatsoever and easily made that lightweight limit without even sweating. He was able to cut that weight so easily, and then as soon as he went to featherweight, he kind of threw his body all out of whack, and now it feels as though he has struggled recently to cut to lightweight. Yep. And so maybe
it happens.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting older, and that whole experiment kind of messed with him. Maybe he feels like welterweight is in his future. There's a lot of big guys at welterweight, man. This is an interesting fight, and Stephen Thompson, like you said, isn't the biggest welterweight.
Yeah.
But even if Anthony Pettis wins, I don't know that it puts him in a spot where he would be in the best position to flourish.
For sure. Back to Twitter from Jeremy Couch. If TJ misses weight, of course, ahead of UFC Brooklyn, should the UFC keep the fight with the bantamweight title on the line, or should they throw in Megan Olivi's husband for the flyweight title? Of course, talking about Joseph Benavidez.
So if TJ misses weight, I don't know. This is an interesting one because in the lead up to this fight, I've talked to Henry Cejudo's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, many times, and he has told me repeatedly that if TJ misses weight, the fight is Joseph's. Joseph's flyweight title shot right there. Henry Cejudo on Monday said that even if TJ misses weight, that fight is still going on, the Henry Cejudo versus TJ Dillashaw. So who knows? I think if TJ misses weight by a lot, we're probably seeing Joseph Benavidez. But if it's only like a 0.5 of a pound or a pound, this feels like a big enough fight at this point, and it is a big platform with ESPN that they'll still continue with that fight.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Now, whether they put the title on the line, I don't know. I don't know if that's something they would do.
Well, the title wouldn't be on the line if TJ misses weight.
The bantamweight title, I mean. I think he's asking about the bantamweight title.
Oh, they actually couldn't do that through New York regulations unless Henry Cejudo also Henry Cejudo would effectively have to weigh in after TJ Dillashaw.
Overweight for 125.
Yeah, he would have to weigh more than 125 pounds for that to even be in the conversation.
So basically, if Cejudo wants that to happen, he has to wait for Dillashaw to see what he weighs.
Yeah.
He can't weigh in first, because if he weighs in first at 125, he can't fight for the bantamweight title.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a weird situation.
It certainly is. Hey,
okay.
This is MMA, baby. This is what we do.
Next question coming from our own Alexander K. Lee.
Hey,
he's asking on Twitter about Brock Lesnar. He says, just look at the UFC rankings. Which of these fighters would you favor Lesnar to beat if he came back? Not asking where he'd rank, just more about matchups. And then he sort of lists the whole top 15. So I don't want to go through all 15, but of these top 15, as you're looking at this picture, Mark, how many do you think you would favor Brock Lesnar to win?
I'd say about half.
Yeah, right? That sounds about right.
About half.
The Walt Harrises and Stephen Struves of the world?
I think so. I don't think he's beating top 5 guys necessarily. Although, you know what I would like to see? I'd like to see Derek Lewis versus Brock Lesnar.
I was about to ask you that. He might beat Derek Lewis. Or it might just
beat Derek Lewis.
It might just be the most outrageous knockout you've ever seen.
But he might get his head knocked off by Derek Lewis too. Yeah. You know what? Add that to my list for 2019. Brock Lesnar versus the Black Beast, baby. The Beast versus the Black Beast. Let's do it.
Now that I would watch. I'm not big on Brock Lesnar fights, but I would be really interested in that one.
Yeah, that'd be great. Also, thank you, Alex K. Lee, for actually taking a screenshot of the rankings and putting it in your tweet. What a mensch.
Let's see what's coming up next. From Stashed on Twitter, who wants to know if Zabit Magomedsharipov beats Jeremy Stephens decisively, who would he fight next? He trains with Frankie Edgar. Aldo shouldn't get another title shot. I don't believe Ortega would take on Zabit after his loss to Max. Would Zabit versus Moicano make sense, especially if the belt is vacated?
Yeah.
That is a good question. I feel as though Zabit might be one fight away, if at most 2 fights away from that title shot. If he wins against Jeremy Stephens in a very decisive, spectacular way, I think he could make a case for being that guy. If it's just a regular win, I feel like he probably needs another one, in which case that's an interesting situation, because you got Alexander Volkanovski, you got Zabit, and you have Frankie Edgar all kind of hovering in that same sort of space. Renato Moicano as well, who was fighting Jose Aldo. So there will be a compelling case to be made.
You also have Brian Ortega out there. Let's not forget about him.
Well, he's not getting a rematch anytime soon.
I wouldn't say that. Well, I mean, look, right or wrong. I mean, I don't disagree with your sentiment there, but that doesn't mean the UFC won't do it.
I think you would have to win at least 2 fights very impressively for the UFC to consider that. Considering the amount of contenders.
As far as like a Zabit opponent, I could see them putting him with Ortega at some point.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah.
I think you're right on. I think he's 2 wins away unless he finishes Stephens in an impressive fashion. Then I think he give the shot. I think that's possible.
Yeah. Let's do one more, and then we gotta do the promo and then get out of here.
Yeah. Oh,
come on, Mark. Be a professional.
I can't help it. I'm getting a call. From Ryan O'Dowd on Twitter. Gents, how high do you think Jake Hager's ceiling is in MMA?
So this is the former Jack Swagger, if I'm not wrong, right?
You are not wrong.
So I don't know much about him. I'm not going to lie. I'm not a big pro wrestling guy. So what do you think is the ceiling for Jake Hager?
It's so hard to say without having seen him fight yet. I think he was obviously a great wrestler in college, but he's in his late 30s and college was a long time ago. So it's hard. It's hard to kind of figure out where he's at right now. He did professional wrestling and he's still doing professional wrestling. And he takes a lot of independent pro wrestling bookings. So I wonder how often he really is training in MMA. Obviously, he is still going to be a good wrestler, but how is his striking? How is his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? The matchup they have for him next week at Bellator 214 is certainly a beneficial one. It's a showcase fight, essentially. But we'll probably know a lot more about Hager next week. But he's got size, he's got athleticism, he's got good wrestling. And the heavyweight division, all those things can usually make for a pretty successful career. At least in some respects. So I'm curious, at least. I'm intrigued to see what he can do.
he certainly is in a good spot for his own path, right? Because Bellator is the one promotion. I mean, the UFC is not going to set up showcase fights for you
Right.
in that sense, and Bellator can really curate and sort of self pick out his own path to really establish him as somebody and slowly bring him up. So he's in the right place in Bellator.
Yeah,
and you're
plus,
right.
plus they're letting him wrestle. They're letting him do pro wrestling still. So
yeah. So and you're right. The heavyweight division isn't the deepest, but he is starting really late. He may have that wrestling base already that from that amateur wrestling background, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm curious. I like that card next week for Bellator.
Well, hey man, this is the first show in 2019. It's almost done. Let's end things with the promo. You go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. So, as many of you know who follow me on social media, I spent 10 days in Japan to start off the year in Tokyo, and it was a really incredible experience. And I recommend really anyone, especially combat sports fans, especially pro wrestling fans, to get out to Tokyo at some point. There's a lot to do there. I mean, not even combat sports fans. If you're a fan of like good food, Tokyo is the place to be. Shaun, I've never seen. I grew up in New York. I grew up in New York City. I have never seen the volume and quality of food that Tokyo has. It's just off the charts. Especially if you like Japanese food, if you like sushi, if you like ramen, like I do, there is no better place to be on the planet than Tokyo. And it's just a very unique city in many ways culturally than we are here. Like for instance, I went to New Japan's Wrestle Kingdom on January 4th at the Tokyo Dome, which is they got about 40,000 people for that show. Do you know that the Japanese pro wrestling fans actually clean up after themselves when they see an event?
What do you mean?
Like I mean, when you're at an event in the States, like let's say you're going to a Phoenix Suns game and you have your soda and your hot dog, or maybe you're not eating a hot dog because you can't eat gluten, but you have whatever you have. What are you doing with that food at the end of the night? You're leaving that there on the floor, are you not?
No, I'm throwing it in the trash. I'm a grown man.
I mean, okay, maybe you're a nice guy. Some of us are not so nice. Maybe some of us on this very show. Anyway, the Japanese fans clean up everything themselves, and when they walk out, like in the tunnel there, and like the vestibule, they throw it all out like in like a huge garbage. It's crazy to see, and the order in which they leave these stadiums. Again, it was a huge stadium. They leave in by section by section. It's a very orderly way to do it. Even like their subway, very orderly. Everyone moves to the left, going up the escalator. It's a very cool, interesting culture, a very polite, orderly, and clean culture. The bathrooms, my friend, it's another level of cleanliness that even in a subway station bathroom. As someone who grew up in New York, if you go to a subway station bathroom in New York, it looks like a crime had just been committed. Probably in most cases, it looks absolutely heinous. If you go to a subway station bathroom in Tokyo, it's almost sparkling. It's clean. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy to experience that kind of stuff. And it's an enormous city. It's a city bigger than New York, yet far, far cleaner. And it's just a really cool city. I went to this. I was posting photos from this store that's like the combat sports like memorabilia store. And man, this place was so amazing. We spent like hours there. I could have spent like an entire day at this store. They had like K1 shirts, Pride figurines, K1 figurines, pro wrestling figurines. They had DVDs and Blu-rays. I don't even know if they were Blu-rays because they're old, and VHS tapes of like almost every Pride, almost every K1, almost every Shudo, almost every like Japanese promotion in in combat sports going back years and years and years, all pro wrestling stuff. It was like heaven on earth. It was so freaking cool, man. It's called Turakan, and that's just the place that you have to go one time as a combat sports fan. It's just an amazing place. So yeah, it was a really good start to my year. Happy to be back now, but I do recommend Japan. And I saw people asking on Twitter food recommendations and everything like that. Honestly, you really can't go wrong with food in Japan. You can eat from the convenience store. You can eat from 7-Eleven in Lawson and have good food, or like a vending machine and have good food. They have hot coffee from vending machines. It's just mind-blowing stuff. But I will say use the website Tabelog. It's TABELOG.com. Tabelog. It's kind of like the Japanese Yelp, and that gives you a pretty good guide of what is in your area as far as what to eat. Again, and most of it is good across the board, but that's a little bit of a good guide. Also, if you see a line of locals outside of a place, that's a place that you're probably going to want to go to. So keep that in mind as well. It was a great time.
So I'll give you a quick, very, very 30 seconds. Best single meal you ate in Japan.
Oh, okay. So I think the best thing I ate was something they call gyutatsu, and it was essentially a pork cutlet, a breaded fried pork cutlet. It was deep fried only on the outside, and they give it to you like that, and they give you like a little bit of like a grill with it. So you basically take the pork cutlet that is fried on the outside and cooked on the outside, and you put it on and you put it on the grill, flip both sides, and you kind of cook it yourself. You sear it on both sides yourself. Man, that was so damn good. And then you dip it in like a soy sauce or like a horseradish sauce. Man, that was just next level, unbelievable. And it was like a 10-seat place in Tokyo, like in a basement in Tokyo, and it was so like random. It was exceptional.
Oh my Lord, you're making me hungry. All right, well, hey, I'll get through mine really quickly. I just want to. It's a little bit of a personal note, but as much as I would love to be watching this card on Saturday, I will not be able to be covering this card on Saturday. And do you know why, Marc Raimondi?
I don't know why.
I am getting married.
Are you shirking your duties as an MMA reporter?
Always.
What could you possibly have in your life, Shaun, that is more important than watching the first UFC card on ESPN Plus? What is more important than that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm getting married on Friday.
What?
I am getting married on Friday. It has been a long time coming. I have been with my fiance for a long time. We're going, I think this is year 9. I want to say this is year 9. We kind of grew up together, and we're finally taking this step. It has been the most stressful. Setting up this damn wedding has been the most stressful thing. One of the most stressful things that we've ever done. I do not advise setting up a wedding. It is not fun. Anybody out there looking to get married, maybe just go to a courthouse and do it, because it seems like that would be a lot easier and a lot more fun. And then you could spend all the money on a cool little vacation for yourself. But hey, anyway, I'm looking forward to it. Are you
doing a honeymoon?
We don't have one yet. So I will be back next week because I'm a professional and I don't miss shows, Marc Raimondi. I don't take long vacations. But we don't have one yet. She has to get some more PTO before we can take one. So we'll probably be some point this year. But
let's go to Tokyo.
I would love to go to Tokyo. She doesn't have as much interest in Tokyo as you or I do, but
you should go. You should go somewhere sunny with beaches that you can relax.
I think that's probably the plan, some sort of tropical thing. But it's good. I'm excited, man. I just want to get. Honestly,
you don't sound excited.
Honestly, I just want to get it done with.
I'm excited, man. I'm excited. Are you trying to convince me or yourself?
I am excited for the actual day. I just want to get to the day. I still have a long list of stuff we still have left to figure out and do. And this thing is like 2 days away. But hey, man, I hope the card is wonderful. I'll catch up on it later. I will be probably very drunk on Friday and enjoying myself.
You're gonna have your phone out with ESPN Plus on it, aren't you? I know you are.
I can't tell you that I'm not going to. So
you're at least going to be checking Twitter 1,000%.
Yeah, most likely. I'm a degenerate. What do you want from me?
Even when I was in Tokyo, I was still on Twitter pretty much all day. It's terrible. It's a horrible.
Oh yeah. Anytime I go on vacation, I'm like just watching fights. Still,
it's disgusting.
There's something wrong with us. But anyway, I'm looking forward to that, and I think that you had a nice little start to your 2019. I'll have one as well, and then we'll come back next week. I will be a married man, and you will finally be recovered from your very long vacation that you took.
I was still a bit jet lagged, but I think by next week I'll be good to go.
Sounds good, man.
Congratulations, man. Have a great time this week. Don't stress too hard, please.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We need you here, so keep it cool. Keep it cool. Keep it tranquilo. Keep it tranquilo.
And with that is our first show of 2019. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. This has been the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. It's going to be a fun year. There's a lot of big stuff coming. We have a lot of cool stuff planned for you guys on MMA fighting. Keep it locked to the website. All week we got multiple people in Brooklyn, Next week we got Bellator. Week after that we got more stuff. It's just gonna we got the train keeps rolling. The schedule does not stop now that it has started. And so thank you for joining us. We have missed you guys, and it is good to be back. Any final words before we leave, Marc?
Stay tuned to our iTunes feed for all the shows that we do here, and possibly some extra goodies for you over the course of the next few months and more, hopefully.
Oh, look at that. Look at that tease.
A little bit of a tease.
All right.
Well, now we got to follow through probably now that I said it.
Yeah, now you're setting up something, some expectations. In the meantime, thank you guys again so much for joining us. We will see you next week, same time, same place, and please enjoy the fights.
Hey, so.